Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at part 44 of the Hercules story from Ritchie's Fabulae Faciles. Now this chapter is called the Poisoned Robe, and it's the second to last part or chapter of the Hercules story, so we're getting to the very end here. At this point in the narrative, we're done with the 12 labors. Hercules has gone back, he's got a new wife, Deianira. Started a new family, and if you remember in the previous chapter, he ran, or his family, him and his wife had run into the centaur Nessus, right? So they were trying to cross a river after they've been basically kicked out of Thebes. They run into the centaur, and he volunteered to help them. Right? And remember that the trick that Nessus pulls is as soon as Hercules goes out into the water, he basically tries to abduct Deianira. Hercules turns around and he ends up shooting him with an arrow, right? Basically killing Nessus. So Nessus hasn't quite died yet, but we're going to pick the story up there and you're going to see sort of how this part of the story relates to the death of Hercules and why this is all connected, okay? Now, before we dive too far in, like I always tell you in these videos, the first thing you want to do is make sure you have the vocab under control, just because it's almost impossible to read the Latin if you don't know what the words mean. So either pre-read this and make your own vocab list or find one from a commentary. There's a bunch out there you can find on Quizlet. There's a bunch of different things that you could kind of make to help you, but start with vocab, right? Memorize as many of the words as you can so that way you have an advantage when you read. The other thing you want to do is you want to read the story aloud. So I always tell you this, but read it. If you're a student, try to find a classmate, someone you can read the story to, have them read it back to you. That way you're working on your speaking and pronunciation when you read, and you're also working on your listening when you have your partner read it back to you. You never want to shut these parts of your brain off. They're really important for helping you kind of treat Latin as a language and really dive into it. You don't want to only be reading it in your head and doing translation kind of in your mind and writing it down. Open yourself up to this. It'll help. You never know. It might just be what unlocks Latin for you. So I always encourage you to do that. Okay. And the last thing I encourage you to do is do the read and reread method. So as you read through this, write down any problem areas you have. It could be vocab. Maybe you just didn't memorize the words as well as you thought. It could be grammar, whatever it is, write them down in a list. When you get to the end of the story, go back and look at your list and try to fix the gaps, right? The problem areas. So maybe if it's vocab, you just look it up. That's pretty easy, right? Just find out what the word means. If it's grammar, I'd encourage you to try to either figure it out on your own by looking at it or use a commentary. There's a few grammar commentaries out there that'll help you kind of make sense of it. But one way or another, try to figure out where you're going wrong and then go back and read the story again and again until you can get through the entire thing without needing any vocab help and without having to check any sort of grammar commentary or grammar help. If you can do that and understand most, if not all of the story, you know that you're in a good place and you're ready to move on. Okay, so if you haven't done that yet, pause the video, go do it. If you have, use the rest of the video as sort of a double check just to make sure you're on the right track. Again, not that my translations are ever perfect, but it should give you sort of a guide way so that you can feel like you're on the right track and you're doing it correctly. Okay, sort of a double check after you've done your work. Okay, so let's pick it up there and we'll dive in and work through as we go. So the story starts like this. You have Nessus igitor, sagita Hercules transfixus moriens humi Jakeba. Ad ne occasionem sui ulciscendi dimiteret ita locutus est. Okay, so we have Nessus, right, who is the centaur. So therefore, you have Nessus transfixus, right? It's your participle. So having been pierced by the sagita Hercules, by the arrow of Hercules, right? He was lying, Jakeba, he was lying on the ground, which is the humi part, right? On the ground, moriens, dying. So he's lying, dying on the ground because he got shot by Hercules. So then you have a negative purpose clause here. So the ne and dimiteret, right? So you have the subjunctive, the ne is showing the negation. It's just a negative purpose clause. So you have but, so that he might not miss dimiteret, right? So he might not lose or might not sort of let go of or miss an opportunity, occasionem, right? And miss an opportunity. Then you have here sui ulciscendi. So the ulciscendi is a gerundive. It's going with sui. So since they're both genitive, you can translate it with of, right? And you can do a lot of times, we just say translate it as if it's ing, right? Think of it almost as a gerund. So it's so that he might not miss an opportunity of avenging himself, sui ulciscendi, right? So kind of getting a little bit of vengeance, right? So that he doesn't miss that, thus locutus est, he spoke, right? So he spoke in this way. So he says something. It's kind of the idea while he's dying. And then you have the quote of what he said. He says, to Deianira, verbis morientis audi. Okay? So you, Deianira, right? He's talking directly to Deianira, right? And he says, audi verba morientis, right? So audi is the command, right? Listen to. So he says, listen to the words, the verba, right? So you have that imperative followed by the direct object. Listen to the words of morientis. So this is genitive, so you can think of it as of a dying person, right? So it literally means like listen to the words of the dying, right? Of the person dying, of a dying man, you might say. So he says, listen to my words. And he's talking directly to Hercules' wife. And he says, si amore maritis tui conservare vis hunc sanguinem qui nunc e pectore meo effunditur sume ac repone ... Right? So we're going to kind of pause it here because he does have a long sort of speech he says to her. Okay? So he says, if you wish, right? So the vis there, if you want or if you wish to conservare, to keep the love, the amorem of your husband, mariti tui, rather. So if you want to hold on to his amore, right? His love, his amor, right? So he says, if you want to do that, he has two commands for her, sume ac repone. Okay, so he tells her to do two things. So he says, if you want to do this, right? He says, collect and kind of hold on to, right? Sume ac repone. Okay. So those two commands, the sume is sort of the taking up, right? The repone means like kind of hold on to. Think of like repository, right? So hold on to. And what does he tell her to hold on to? Hunc sanguinem, right? This blood, which now effunditur is flowing out from my chest, e pectore meo, right? So he says, if you want to hold on to the love of Hercules, take my blood, is basically what he says. Then he has tum, si unquam in suspicionem tibi venere, vestem mariti hoc sanguine inficies. Okay? So he says, then, if ever, right, if ever he comes under suspicion or in suspicionem, right? Under suspicion is kind of a good way to do it, right? By you, tibi, right? Or for you, either way, it'll get at the right idea. So in other words, he's saying if ever you're suspicious of him, meaning of Hercules, okay? He says, inficies, vestem mariti, right? So the inficies there could mean stain is some way to do it, dye. It means like pour the blood on it is kind of the idea. So maybe staining is the best way to do it. Now, there you have what's called the future more vivid condition, right? So in other words, you have that the way of saying basically if something, you will do something. Okay. So in other words, if it ever comes to that, right, it comes into your suspicion, you will, inficies, right, you will stain the vestem, the clothes of your husband, mariti, right, hoc sanguine, with this blood. So he says to her, if you want to hold on to his love, if you ever are suspicious of him, right, and kind of his loyalty, put this blood on his clothes. Okay. Then you have haec locutus nessus animum efflavit Deianira autem nihil mali suspicata imperata fecit. Okay, so he basically dies is the idea, right? So the haec locutus, right? So you have having said this or having said these things, nessus he efflavit animam, right? So the efflavit part has to do with basically breathing, right? Breathing out. So he breathed out his animam, his spirit. Right, and again, that's a very common idiom of how you die in ancient Greek. Right, you let that last puff of air out, your spirit. So he dies. Right, so having said this, he dies. Okay, then you have Deianira, however. Right, suspicata is the participle describing her. So suspecting nihil mali, nothing bad. Right, mali there's the genitive, so it means like nothing of a bad thing. It's just the part of genitives. But in English, you say suspecting nothing evil or nothing bad. She fecit imperata. She carried out his orders. Right, fecit. She did his commands. Right, so she collects the blood because she doesn't think there's anything weird about this. Okay. Then you have Paulo post Hercules bellum contra Euritum regem oicaliae suscepit, et cum regem ipsum cum filiis interfecisset, iolen eius filiam captivam secum reduxit. Okay, so you have a little while after, Paulo post, right? So a little while after all this. So Hercules, right? He suscepit, he undertook a bellum, a war against Eurytus, right? So he takes basically another king. So he undertook a war against this person, right? Eurytus, the king of Oicalia. Okay, so just another king is kind of all you need to really worry about it. But he fights in a war. Okay, and you have cum, since, right? Since he interfecissed, he had killed the king himself, right, with his sons, cum filius. So since he'd done this, right, he had kind of killed the king, killed all his sons, he reduxit, he returned, or he took back with him, secum, he took back eole, right? Now the yolen there is just the Greek accusative, right? So the en ending, don't get thrown off by it. It's just the direct object here. Okay, so he took back Iole, his daughter, right? The captive daughter, right? Filiam captivum, his captive daughter. So in other words, Hercules kills the king, kills his son, and he takes his captured daughter as basically a prize, right? And her name is Iole. Then it continues, and you have antequam tamen domum venit, nauam ad Canaiam promontorium apulit. Et in terram egressus aram constituit ut Iovi sacrificare. Okay, so he's taken this prisoner, right? He's taken this girl with him, and you have before, however, he venit domum, he arrived home, right? He came home. So before he came home, he apulit nawem. So he kind of put the ship in, you might say. He drove the ship is kind of one way to do it too, right? He landed the ship is kind of the idea. At the promontory, right? So sort of like the cape of Canias, okay? So he drives his ship there, and he pauses for a minute, okay? And the reason he does this is given, right? And egressus in terram, so having egressed, right, gotten off onto the land, right? Embarked onto the land, you might think. He decided to make a sacrifice. So he built an altar, right? Constituit aram. He built an altar so that he might sacrifice to Jupiter, right? Iovi sacrificata. Okay, so he decides to make a quick sacrifice to Zeus, his father. Okay. Then you have dumtamen sacrificium parat, licam comitem suum domum misit, qui vestem albam referet, mos enem erat apud antiquos dum sacrificia facerent, album Westem Gerere. Okay, so while, however, he's preparing the sacrifice, so sacrificium para, right? So while he's preparing the sacrifice, he sent home Lyca, right? His own companion, comitem suum, so one of his companions. He sent him home. Okay, and the reason he does this is to basically get new clothes. You're going to see, right? So he sent him home or homeward that he might bring, right, referet, that he might bring Westem album, white clothes, okay? So you could say he sent back Lyca who might bring white clothing for him, okay? And the reason is given, for, right, enim, for it was custom, mos erat, right, it was custom among the ancients that while making a sacrifice, sacrificia facerent, right, while making a sacrifice, it was custom to wear, gerere, to wear albam westem, to wear the white clothing. Okay, so it's not a T-shirt in my picture, but you get the idea, right? The white robes to make this sacrifice. Okay, and then we have the last line. You have at Deianira verita ne Hercules amorem erga Iolen haberet vestem priusquam lica dedet sanguine nessi infecit. And now we're going to see how the whole story kind of comes together with Deianira and the bloodstained clothes. So you start with but Deianira, remember his wife. Now you have verita there. So verita is coming from verior, right, which means to be afraid. So we have what we call a fear clause here. So sometimes you see it as fearing lest, which sounds a little bit odd in English, but that's kind of one way to do it. But it's basically fearing that is kind of another way, or lest, right? That Hercules, right, he had amorem, he had love for Iolen, right? So he's holding this love for the captured woman that he took. So she's afraid of this. And the erga there is a way of saying toward, right? So erga goes with an accusative. So it's saying fearing that he had love, amorem for or toward Iolen, right? So what does she do? She gave to Lycae, right, the friend that he had sent, but before rather, so priescum, so before she gave the Westem, the clothing to Lyca, right, before she gave the clothes, she infecit sanguine nessi. She stained, infecit, right, she dyed them is kind of the missing word. but she stained them with the sanguine Nessie, with the blood of Nessus. And now we see how the whole story ties together. Remember, Nessus told her to take his blood, and he said, if you're ever afraid that Hercules doesn't love you anymore, put this on his clothing. So that's what she does. She's afraid of who this girl is that Hercules has brought back. So when it comes time for the clothing, now she's actually going to use that blood of Nessus, and we're going to see what happens in the last chapter. But if you've looked ahead, it's called the death of Hercules, so you can kind of take a guess, okay? So hopefully that made some sense. There are a couple trickier things in there. That future more vivid condition is a little bit of a tricky one. The fear clause we just saw. But if you have any questions at all or anything you're not sure of, feel free to put it in the comments below. I'll be happy to help or explain anything that you need help with. But otherwise, just keep practicing, right? Keep at it. And like I tell you, the more you read through this, particularly if you use that read and reread method, the more you read through, the easier it'll be. And you're trying to hit a point where you can read through this whole thing and understand what's going on without any help. If you're in that place, perfect. That means you're ready to move on. If not, just keep doing it and keep practicing until you get there. Good luck.